All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today, we will be joined by our guest, Mohammed Mustafa Malik Fall, the UN Resident Coordinator in Nigeria, who will brief on the situation in the country. He'll do that right after this part. And allow me to remind you that our next briefing will be on Tuesday. Monday is a UN holiday for Eid al-Adha. A few moments ago, the Secretary General participated in the outreach session of the G7 summit in Italy. As outlined in his press conference in Geneva, the Secretary General carried a number of messages to the G7, notably on climate change, artificial intelligence, and reform of the international financial architecture. He encouraged the G7 to step up and go further, faster in climate action by showing greater climate solidarity by finance, technology transfer, and so forth. He reiterated his call for real reform of the international financial architecture so that it better represents developing countries and responds to their needs. On artificial intelligence, he told the gathering that these technologies must support human rights, sustainable development, and benefit all humanity. Instead of racing ahead of regulation, exacerbating power imbalances, further concentrating wealth, and raising tensions and divisions. He highlighted the recommendations of his advisory panel on artificial intelligence in that regard. The Secretary General is also scheduled to hold some bilateral meetings later in the day. On Lebanon and Israel, we remain very concerned by the recent escalation across the Blue Line and beyond. In her engagements this past week with key Lebanese and international interlocutors, the Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Janine Hennis-Pleshert, conveyed her deep concern at the escalating situation across the Blue Line. The Special Coordinator calls on the parties to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from any action or statement that could further fuel tensions. She also stresses the urgency of ensuring the protection of civilians. UNIFIL peacekeepers remain on the ground, conducting their mandated operational activities and working at all levels to de-escalate tensions. Since October, we've seen too many lives lost, families uprooted, and neighborhoods destroyed. The danger of a wider conflagration is very real. We continue to engage with the parties and urge all actors to avoid hostile actions, return to a cessation of hostilities under the framework of Security Council Resolution 1701, and work towards a diplomatic solution. Turning to the situation in Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that displaced families continue to face dire conditions and significant challenges in accessing basic services. That's according to multiple humanitarian assessments carried out over the past month. OCHA led 2 such assessments last week at informal displacement sites in Deir el-Bala, where thousands of people are sheltering. Families there said the shelters are overcrowded and lack sanitation infrastructure. Food distributions are irregular, and residents reported a range of health issues, such as hepatitis A, skin diseases, and respiratory illnesses. Access to water is also critically low. Our partners working on water, sanitation, and hygiene in Gaza report that critical infrastructure continues to sustain significant damage. They say the recent intensification of military operations has resulted in additional losses of key water and sanitation assets, including 5 water production wells in Jabalia in the north, as well as 2 water wells and 2 desalination plants in Rafah in the south. These partners estimate that over the past 8 months, more than 2/3 of water and sanitation facilities and infrastructure in Gaza have been destroyed or damaged due to the conflict. Once again, OCHA underscores that humanitarian operations in Gaza must be fully facilitated and all impediments must be lifted. To give you just one example of these challenges, UNICEF spokesman James Elder said that one of the agency's trucks carrying medicines and nutrition supplies for 10,000 children in Gaza was turned back on Wednesday despite approvals for the mission. Mr. Elder says that they were held for 8 hours at checkpoints, and it took 13 hours to move just 40 kilometers. A group of senior UN officials and heads of international non-governmental organizations issued a statement yesterday in which they called for the immediate and unconditional release of all personnel held in Yemen by the Houthi de facto authorities. The officials in the joint statement said that they are extremely concerned about the Houthi de facto authorities' recent detention of 17 members of the UN and international NGOs, and many others associated with civil society organizations, national and international NGOs, and other organizations supporting humanitarian activities. These detentions are unprecedented, not only in Yemen but globally, and directly impede our ability to reach the most vulnerable people in Yemen, including the 18.2 million people who need humanitarian aid and protection. They asked the de facto authorities to confirm the exact whereabouts of those detained and the conditions in which they are being held, as well as for immediate access to them. All those detained must be immediately released, they added. The signatories include the heads of UNDP, UNESCO, UNICEF, WFP, WHO, and the Human Rights Office. This weekend, the Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed will travel to Paris, France to take part on Monday in the SDG 4 High-Level Steering Committee and the opening of the Transforming Education Summit, Stocktake, aimed at galvanizing global efforts to transform education and achieve Sustainable Development Goal 4. While in Paris, the Deputy Secretary General will also meet with senior government officials and other stakeholders, including on issues relating to development finance, debt, and global taxation issues. She will return to New York next Tuesday. At the invitation of the President of the Swiss Confederation, the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, will travel to Switzerland over the weekend to attend as an observer the Summit on Peace in Ukraine to be held in Bergenstock. The United Nations reiterates its support for just and sustainable peace in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter, international law, and relevant General Assembly resolutions. This morning, the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Alice Wairimo Ndritu, briefed Security Council members on the implementation of Resolution 2686 on tolerance and international peace and security. Among other issues, this resolution refers to the importance of combating intolerance, promoting interreligious and intercultural dialogue, advancing human rights, promoting women's full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation and leadership at all levels of decision-making, strengthening education for peace, and addressing and countering hate speech. Ms. Ndritu encouraged council members to continue the consideration of hate speech, including by requesting more regular briefings on this topic by relevant UN entities. She also encouraged them to continue engaging with tech and social media companies to emphasize their roles and responsibilities in tackling online hate speech, and to continue supporting the inclusion of women in the peace and security agenda, including on issues relating to countering hate speech against women. Ms. Ndritu's briefing comes ahead of the International Day for Countering Hate Speech, which is next Tuesday. And this afternoon at 3 p.m., the Security Council will reconvene for a briefing on threats to international peace and security. The High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Izumi Nakamitsu, is expected to brief Council members. Turning to the situation in Sudan, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, warned that the humanitarian nightmare in El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, is worsening by the hour. In a social media post, he said he hopes the Security Council resolution adopted yesterday will ease the suffering of civilians in the city. Mr. Griffiths stressed that they must be protected, aid must be able to reach them, and the fighting must stop now. Meanwhile, our colleagues from the World Food Programme in Sudan are underscoring the urgency of getting food to people in need before rains cut off access to remote areas. The agency reports that a convoy carrying aid for some 160,000 people crossed into Darfur this week from Chad. Is the third convoy to enter the country through the Tyne border crossing in the past 2 months. That assistance is bound for Central, East, and West Darfur. WFP says food distributions are also underway for over 50,000 people in South Darfur and an estimated 200,000 people in Al-Jazeera state. The distributions there are the first since conflict spread to the state capital, Wad Madani, and other parts of Sudan's breadbasket in December. Our colleagues from the Peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, tell us that they recently held a 3-day electoral administration skills training session in Yambio, West Equatoria, as the country prepares for elections. The training, attended by civil society representatives and members of the National Election Committee, focused on understanding standards, principles, and administrative techniques crucial for the smooth functioning of the electoral process. Meanwhile, the mission recently built and handed over a new police post in Yambio to support local authorities in strengthening the rule of law and protection of civilians. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, today called for concrete measures to halt the human rights violations and abuses that continue to endanger reconciliation and peace in Ethiopia. His call came as his office issued an update that presents an analysis of the human rights situation across Ethiopia from January 2023 to January this year. The update says that violent conflicts, particularly in the Amhara and Oromia regions, have led to serious human rights violations and abuses in 2023. In the North Tigray region, there was a significant improvement in the human rights situation following the cessation of hostilities agreement in November 2022. But the Human Rights Office says that concerns persist regarding ongoing violations by members of the Eritrean Defense Forces. You can find the update online. And the Human Rights Office has also issued a report which found that the global fight against female genital mutilation is being undermined by the practice of crossing national borders and beyond to have girls undergo the procedure. The report adds that although many states have intensified their efforts to eradicate female genital mutilation, the practice continues across the world, in part due to, quote, the clandestine nature of cross-border and transnational female genital mutilation, close quote. An estimated 4.3 million girls were at risk of being subjected to this practice in 2023. The full report is online. Today is World Blood Donor Day, and the theme of this year is 20 years of celebrating giving. Thank you, blood donors. The World Health Organization points out that blood transfusion saves lives and improves health, but many patients requiring transfusion do not have timely access to safe blood. Providing safe and adequate blood should be an integral part of every country's national healthcare policy and infrastructure. Tomorrow is World Elder Abuse Day, with the theme Spotlight on Older Persons in Emergencies, emphasizing the urgent need to protect and support older individuals during crises. And Sunday is the International Day of Family Remittances, which highlights the economic impact of this money on households, communities, and nations, and recognizes the sacrifice, separation, and generosity often involved. And then Monday is the World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought. In his message, the Secretary General notes that the security, prosperity, and health of billions of people rely on thriving lands supporting lives, livelihoods, and ecosystems. But we're vandalizing the earth that sustains us, he says, adding that every second, around 4 football fields of healthy land are degraded. And we end the week with the good news that another member state has paid its dues. Elephants are a big part of this country's national identity. Earlier this month, the nation proudly welcomed the rare birth of twin elephants, a male and a female. Any guesses which country? Yeah. You got it. Amelie's right. It's Thailand. So yes, we thank our friends in Thailand for taking us to 115 fully paid up member states. And last, he's not here, but I hope he's watching on TV. Seasons change and reporters have to move on, but it still makes me a little sad to say goodbye to Alan Bulkaty, who's been here as the UN correspondent for RIA Novosti and is now returning to the Russian Federation.
Comes up not hearing it.
Huh? What? Huh? I don't know what that was. Alan has been a valued participant at the noon briefing, and even when he had to ask us questions on weekends or late in the evening, he was always unfailingly polite and considerate. Alan has been a gentleman in the truest sense of the word, and I wish him the best even as he leaves New York. And before we go to our guest, Amelie, since you won, you get to ask the first question.
Thanks, Farhan. I have a question on Afghanistan. The Doha meeting is approaching. It's been a few weeks now that Ms. DiCarlo handed over the invitation to the Taliban. So any information on that front? And there are sources saying that there are doubts about whether the meeting is going to happen altogether. Do you have any comment on that? And what would be the consequences if the meeting does not happen?
I don't want to speculate about that possibility. Obviously, until arrangements are finalized, every meeting has the possibility that it may or may not take place. For now, we're continuing to proceed with making arrangements. We hope that it will work out, and closer to the date, we expect to be able to announce arrangements once those are finalized. But at this stage, of course, we're still in preparations. Regarding that, you saw the language we put out about the invitation being extended, and we'll have to see what the result is. Edie and then Deji.
Thank you, Farhan. Has there been any reaction from the Houthis to the spate of letters and appeals yesterday for the release of the UN and NGO staffers?
On that, no. At this stage, there's nothing to say by way of response, either to yesterday's appeal or to the appeal that was made today by our human rights colleagues in Geneva in the name of Volker Turk. So we're continuing to make various appeals, but there's no improvement in the conditions that I can report back.
Another follow-up and then a question. Will Rosemary DiCarlo be speaking at any event in Switzerland related to the Ukraine meeting?
I don't know whether she'll be asked in any informal capacity, but we're there as an observer, so there's no formal remarks anticipated.
And on Gaza, can you give us an update on what's happening with fuel deliveries? A little while ago, the situation was dire, things were being rationed. Has more fuel been getting in?
What I've been told is that that there have been small amounts getting in, but as we pointed out about a week ago, it's a minimal amount, and so we have had to restrict some activities, and so that situation continues to be the case, and we're hoping for a much more regular and fuller supply of fuel for our activities.
And as a final question, is there any update on the review on the U.S. pier?
To reiterate, the World Food Program, of course, remains in charge of logistics and has not been able to report any resumption of activities. And our security colleagues are still working to ensure that secure conditions for humanitarian work can be reestablished. Deji.
Edie just asked my first question. But anyway, two parts. First, on Ukraine, has the UN officially announced that who will be participating in the peace summit already?
For which?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
it's Rosemary DiCarlo. It's that announcement I made is about her participating as an observer at the Birkenstock meeting.
So today, Russian President Vladimir Putin proposed what he called a peace advice to negotiate with the Ukrainian side. I don't know whether the Secretary General has already seen that proposal and what is his position.
Well, on that, I think what we can say about that is what we've been saying, that what we want to see in Ukraine is peace based on the United Nations Charter and the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and in accordance with international law.
Okay, and then on Gaza, yesterday, Ms. Gamba said the CAC report is a action-originated report, so she will engage with the parties on that list. Has she ever in contact with Israeli government?
She's had contacts with the Israeli government prior to this. I believe she talked to you about this yesterday in her briefing.
So today, I think yesterday, the Israeli government said that they will have some reaction, and they are debating on how to react on that list. Any reaction from the Secretary General?
I don't want to speculate on what actions will be taken, so we'll have to see what their response is.
Are you ready for the action?
We're ready for any actions from any member states. Obviously, we work with all member states trying to promote a good, healthy relationship between the United Nations and the member states of the United Nations, and we'll continue to do so in this case. Gabriel.
Thank you, Farhan. Today, the U.S. government designated an Israeli group called the Tazov 9, a violent extremist Israeli group that has been, according to the U.S. government, blocking, harassing, and damaging convoys carrying aid into Gaza. I know you don't comment specifically on decisions by member states per se. However, some of this aid was UN aid going in. You've spoke about it in the past. The Secretary General has. What is the hope now that this designation might assist in radical Israeli groups attacking aid going into Gaza from the UN?
Our hope is that whatever happens, that there are no attacks on UN or other humanitarian convoys going into Gaza, given the essential need of such aid to saving the lives of the people inside Gaza. And so we continue to implore all parties to make sure that aid goes through without any hindrance or obstruction.
Can I ask one other question, Farhan? Thank you. There are reports that the U.S. might have to dismantle this floating pier again in the coming hours or days. You get a lot of questions about this pier. How would the Secretary General characterize how it's working? There have been humanitarian organizations that have said publicly it's just become a very expensive distraction. Would the Secretary General concur to some degree with that characterization?
I'll just repeat what we've been saying. This has been an additionality to our aid efforts in terms of getting aid in. So we welcome it in that regard, but we have never relied on it as the main way of getting aid in, given the imperative need, in particular, to get aid in by road. Sharife.
Thank you, Farhan. I have a question on the increasing tension on the Israeli-Lebanese border. There are footages circulating on social media showing Israeli forces using a type of catapult to launch fireballs into southern Lebanon to ignite fire. And it seems that this would have significant impacts in an area where they're trying to actually prevent forest fires due to increasing heat. There are also reports claiming that the Israeli army is using this to reduce costs, so it looks like we're back in medieval times. Do you have a reaction to this?
Well, my reaction is simply to repeat what I said at the top of this briefing, that we are encouraging all parties to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from any action or statement that could further fuel tensions, and that we're continuing to engage with the parties and urge all actors to avoid hostile actions, return to a cessation of hostilities under Resolution 1701, and work towards a diplomatic solution. Yes, please, in the back.
Thank you. Damilola for Pass Blue. This is sort of a repetition of my email to you yesterday. Might you have words now on what the UN is doing in Sudan? Second question, interview with MSF, we were told, Pasblu was told, that the UN is not present in El Fasher, and all the 26 agencies that used to be there before the war are no longer operating in El Fasher or anywhere in Sudan. What's your response to this, and what exactly is the situation? Also, in a separate interview with some Sudanese authorities, we were told that the Sudanese provided aid routes and passports to UN aid workers so that they can access and provide aids in this place, but that hasn't happened. Just asking why is the UN not using any of these routes?
First of all, we do use aid routes when we have the access granted. So we've been pushing to make sure that we have access to use aid routes throughout. Of course, one of the problems is the intensity of conflict, which is itself hindering aid from traveling. And so we, and of course the Security Council yesterday, are calling for the fighting to be halted to allow, among other things, for aid to get in. The Secretary General remains deeply concerned over the fighting in and around El Fasher and across the country. A ceasefire is urgently needed to prevent further atrocities, protect critical infrastructure, and alleviate civilian suffering. Yesterday's resolution, Resolution 2736, calls for an immediate halt to the fighting and for de-escalation in and around El Fasher. A de-escalation could be the first step towards finding a sustainable solution to the conflict, and I would add towards making sure that humanitarian aid can get in. Regarding our presence, we do not have any international aid staff present in Al Fasher. I would point out that we do have staff present in Port Sudan, so there are staff still working in different parts of Sudan where possible. Okay, Deji, and then we'll go to our guest.
Oh, sorry. Just a quick question on the delivery of humanitarian aids in Gaza. We heard a lot about the difficulties of delivering aids now in Gaza Strip. Do you have any data how much of those aids has been looted by Hamas, or how did Hamas ever past few months ever try to loot those aids for military purposes?
I wouldn't be able to attribute necessarily responsibility. Obviously, there have been diversion of aid, or what my comrade Stefan referred to as self-distribution. A lot of that has been actually from hungry crowds who have been worried that once there's aid shipments going in, that it would be a one-time only thing, and so they wanted to make sure that they would get that aid. So part of the problem is being able to reassure the local communities that there will be a regular flow of aid, and that therefore each aid delivery is not simply their last chance to get food. But so we need more regular distributions. But certainly there has been looting. And we're trying to get evaluations about how much of the stock has been lost.
But are those lootings from Hamas? Can you?
I have no confirmation, like I said, in terms of attribution of who has been taking what. All right, let's go to our guest.